Grace adjusted her navy blue dress for the third time before ringing the doorbell of the mansion where she grew up, her fingers trembling slightly from the combination of anxiety and fatigue after a 12-hour shift at the hospital. At 25, she maintained the elegant posture she had inherited from her grandmother Catherine, with dark brown hair always neatly styled in a low bun and expressive eyes of the same color that shone with silent determination despite the visible exhaustion. Her light brown skin showed signs of accumulated exhaustion from weeks of working double shifts to get time off for that special night. But she had made a point of wearing the prettiest dress she owned, a gift from her grandmother years ago, for her brother's occasion. In her carefully manicured hands, she held a box wrapped in gold paper with a red silk bow, containing a men's wristwatch that had cost 3 entire months of her salary as a nurse at the public hospital, saving penny by penny for weeks. The well-oiled electronic wrought-iron gate opened with a familiar hum, revealing the impeccable garden she had known since childhood, with its perfectly pruned rose bushes maintained by professional gardeners, marble fountains imported from Italy, and tropical palm trees illuminated by strategically positioned discreet spotlights. The Portuguese stone pathway majestically led to the main entrance of the 3-story mansion, with its imposing neoclassical columns and French windows that reflected the golden, welcoming light from the luxurious interior. All the lights in the main house were festively lit, each room glowing through the imported French lace curtains, indicating that the celebration had already begun and that the preparations had been meticulous and expensive. "Finally arrived, dear sister. Father has been asking about you for over an hour and a half. I'm very sorry for being late, Michael. We had a cardiac emergency at the hospital, and my shift ended much later." Richard appeared at the hand-carved solid wood main door before Grace could even climb the 5 Carrara marble steps that solemnly led to the entrance of the family mansion. At 58 well-lived years, he maintained the imposing and naturally intimidating bearing of someone who had always commanded millionaire businesses and was completely accustomed to being obeyed without question by employees, suppliers, and family. His grey hair was perfectly cut in a conservative style by a private barber who religiously came to the house every week, and he wore a dark blue Italian linen suit with impeccable tailoring that easily cost more than most people earned in an entire year of honest work. His light honey-colored eyes, a genetic inheritance from the paternal family that traced back to several generations of prosperous and successful merchants, examined his daughter meticulously from head to toe with that perpetually critical and calculating expression she had known intimately since her earliest childhood years. His erect posture and broad shoulders clearly demonstrated the unwavering confidence of someone who had built a solid business empire practically from scratch, humbly starting with a small fabric store inherited from his father, and gradually transforming it into a national distribution network that spread throughout the country. The house behind him resplendently displayed European crystal chandeliers imported directly from traditional factories, furniture made of Brazilian noble wood crafted by renowned artisans, and original artworks by established painters, each individual piece carefully chosen by a famous and expensive decorator to unequivocally demonstrate the financial power, cultural refinement, and impressive wealth he had methodically accumulated. Over 3 intense decades of relentless work and risky business decisions that invariably proved extremely profitable. "Grace, you really could have dressed better for your brother's graduation. This is a special historic day for our family. I came directly from work at the hospital, Father. I didn't want to be later than I already unfortunately was." Michael ran down the marble stairs with polished bronze handrail, excitedly taking 2 steps at a time, radiating the naturally contagious energy and genuine joy typical of his 22 years recently completed a few months ago. Graduated exactly 1 week ago in business administration from the most prestigious and expensive university in the country, he possessed the same naturally robust physical structure as his father: broad and muscular shoulders, impressive height above the national average, and large hands that indicated genetically inherited physical strength, but with a naturally softer facial expression, gentle and welcoming in the expressive and kind brown eyes he had inherited from his prematurely deceased mother. He wore a modern-cut suit in an elegant graphite tone, clearly purchased specifically for the occasion from one of the most exclusive and expensive men's stores in the city, and his dark, slightly wavy hair was carefully styled with imported French gel, giving him a sophisticated and mature appearance that harmoniously contrasted with his naturally relaxed and affectionate personality. His young and well-shaved face with quality products radiated deep satisfaction and justified pride in the difficult academic achievement, but also a genuine and warm happiness in seeing his older sister, with whom he had always maintained an extremely close and affectionate relationship since the earliest years of their shared childhood. Upon spotting Grace standing elegantly at the main entrance, his eyes immediately lit up with a wide, sincere and affectionate smile, and he hugged her warmly with the protective and genuine affection he had always naturally demonstrated, despite chronologically being the younger of the two children. It was absolutely impossible not to notice how dramatically he had changed in the last 2 years of college, gaining muscle mass through regular exercise, self-confidence through academic achievements, and a visible maturity in his gaze that clearly prepared him to take on executive responsibilities in the business empire that his father had built, specifically thinking of leaving a solid and lasting legacy for the family's male heir. "Dear sister, I truly can't believe you managed to come. I thought you would be working all night at the hospital saving lives. I would never miss your graduation for anything in this world, Michael. You know perfectly well how proud I am of you and your achievements." Dinner was ceremoniously served in the mansion's main dining room, a truly imposing environment, decorated with authentic French wallpaper in luxurious golden tones and majestically illuminated by a monumental Austrian crystal chandelier that hung gracefully over a polished mahogany table with a generous capacity for 12 people, although only 3 places were carefully and elegantly set with the family's traditional Chinese porcelain and solid silver cutlery that had been inherited from the great-grandmother. The high walls were artistically adorned with original oil paintings of romantic European landscapes and formal portraits of distinguished family ancestors, all framed in genuine gold and strategically positioned to impress important visitors and business partners. The marble floor was completely covered by an authentic Persian rug that had cost a small fortune at an exclusive antique auction, and the high windows with heavy burgundy velvet curtains offered a panoramic view of the professionally illuminated gardens that extended over several hectares of walled private property. Nancy, the middle-aged Mexican maid who had worked dedicatedly for the family for almost 2 complete decades, served an elaborate appetizer, sophisticated main course, and special dessert, with the silent precision and professional efficiency of someone who perfectly knew the particular habits and specific preferences of each family member. She moved through the room like a discreet and respectful shadow, anticipating needs even before they were verbally expressed, a natural result of long years carefully observing and dedicatedly serving that family table. Richard naturally occupied the head of the table like a monarch on his personal throne, completely controlling the natural flow of conversation and directing each topic with the absolute and unquestionable authority of someone who was totally accustomed to being obeyed in all aspects of life, both in professional business and in the domestic family sphere. "Michael, tell your sister in detail about that tempting proposal you received from the large German multinational company. Dad, she must certainly be very tired after the long shift. We can talk about business after the delicious dessert." It was precisely during the special 3-milk dessert with homemade caramel sauce, an exclusive specialty of the professional cook that Richard had hired specifically for special occasions and important family celebrations, that the patriarch made the solemn announcement that would definitively and irreversibly change the course of that seemingly celebratory night and the lives of everyone present in the room. He rose from his upholstered chair with genuinely theatrical solemnity, holding a glass of special reserve red wine, as if he were making an official and historic toast at a solemn meeting of important shareholders, and fixed his penetrating and proud gaze directly on Michael with that unmistakable expression of deep paternal satisfaction and unconditional love that Grace painfully rarely saw directed specifically at her throughout all her 25 years of family life. His words were pronounced with crystalline clarity and overflowing paternal pride, each syllable carefully articulated and dramatically loaded with extremely concrete promises that literally represented millions of dollars in meticulously planned and internally approved future investments. Nancy discreetly stopped collecting the delicate dessert plates to respectfully listen to the paternal pronouncement, instinctively recognizing the historical and familial importance of that transcendental moment for the dynasty she had faithfully served for so many dedicated years. Grace experienced an extremely confusing emotional mixture of genuine happiness for her dear brother's deserved success and bright future, painfully combined with an increasingly intense pang of deep sadness and growing resentment from knowing through 25 years of bitter personal experience that she had never received remotely similar offers or even serious consideration for significant investments in her own continuing education or promising professional career development. My dear son, to worthily celebrate your graduation with highest honors and your bright professional future in international business, I have officially decided to fully pay for your master's degree in international administration in Europe. $800,000 are already duly set aside and invested, awaiting your final decision. Dad, that's absolutely unbelievable. I don't even know how to begin to properly thank you. It's a truly immense amount of money. Grace bravely tried to join the family celebration, politely applauding with her delicate hands and lovingly offering her carefully wrapped present to her beloved brother, but deeply felt in the bottom of her heart that something much bigger, more significant and definitive was being decided at that elegant dinner table, romantically illuminated by imported aromatic candles. She watched with growing attention and an increasingly tighter knot in her stomach as Richard meticulously detailed the grand and elaborately crafted plans for Michael. The spacious two-bedroom apartment in the most noble, safe and valued neighborhood of the city, with stunning panoramic views and complete leisure area, with swimming pool and gym. The brand new imported luxury car to facilitate executive transportation and favorably impress important future business partners. Even a bank account already officially opened with an extremely generous initial value of $50,000 so that he wouldn't worry minimally about basic financial matters during the 2 intensive years of his master's degree abroad. Each promise painfully sounded to her ears like a coldly calculated business investment in the exclusively male future of the family dynasty, while she remained seated there like a polite, irrelevant, and completely dispensable guest in her own childhood home, passively observing the judicious distribution of an inheritance of which she apparently was not part of due to gender issues. The glaring and unfair contrast between the completely different treatment given to the 2 children became progressively more evident and emotionally painful with each minute that slowly passed, each loving word from the father relentlessly hammering in her mind the cruel and inescapable reality that her female gender completely determined her perceived value in the family structure. And I will also buy a completely high-end furnished apartment for you to properly start your adult life without unnecessary financial concerns. Dad, you really don't need to do all of this at once. It's a veritable fortune that you're generously investing in me. The desperate courage emerged from somewhere deep and hidden within Grace's wounded heart when she finally decided to bravely break the respectful silence she had politely maintained throughout the detailed presentation of her father's grandiose plans for her brother's golden future. She cleared her throat delicately with an almost inaudible cough, nervously adjusted the linen napkin on her lap, and patiently waited for her father to completely finish explaining the complex bureaucratic details of fully financing the expensive European master's degree. Then, gathering all the courage accumulated over long years of silent dreams and systematically repressed aspirations, she mentioned with a soft but surprisingly firm voice her own professional dream that she had been secretly cultivating for months in complete secrecy. During the scarce breaks between exhausting shifts at the public hospital, she had spent valuable hours researching specialization programs in cardiology at the best recognized universities in the country, meticulously calculating total costs, academic deadlines, and admission requirements, optimistically imagining how she could balance night work and morning studies to achieve the advanced qualification she had always passionately desired since choosing nursing as her life vocation. Her words came out hesitantly, almost like a timid whisper, as if she herself did not believe she had the moral right to that important conversation or that privileged space at the table where transcendental decisions about the future were traditionally made by the men of the family. Dad, I have also been thinking very seriously about pursuing an advanced medical specialization in cardiology. I've already researched various academic options and the costs involved. Women absolutely don't need that, Grace. You're already 25 years old and should have other more suitable priorities in life. Richard's cruel and deeply disdainful laughter echoed through the elegant dining room like an evil and disturbing echo, instantly and dramatically transforming the previously welcoming and celebratory environment into something icy, hostile, and charged with a palpable emotional tension that made even Nancy discreetly retreat to the distant kitchen. He leaned back comfortably in his Italian leather-upholstered chair, looking condescendingly at his daughter, as if she had told the most absurd, ridiculous, and childish joke he had ever heard in his entire extensive business life. And his clear, honey-colored eyes dangerously gleamed with a toxic mixture of cruel amusement and paternal contempt that cut through Grace's sensitive heart like an emotional dagger dipped in burning salt. His eyebrows arched in an exaggerated expression of theatrical incredulity, as if the mere bold suggestion that a woman could have serious and legitimate professional ambitions was an intolerable affront to the natural order of the patriarchal universe he had meticulously built around himself for decades. Michael instinctively lowered his brown eyes to his completely untouched dessert plate, visibly uncomfortable and embarrassed by the tense situation dramatically unfolding before him, but completely without the courage or moral authority to bravely defend his sister in front of the authoritarian and intimidating figure of their father, who rigorously controlled not only all the family's money, but also all important decisions about who deserved investment and support to grow professionally in life. You should be married and dedicatedly taking care of your own home, not wasting precious time foolishly dreaming about impossible careers that are unsuitable for your female gender. But Dad, I am a trained nurse with excellent academic grades. I have all the technical and intellectual capacity to specialize professionally. Richard's following and definitive words were pronounced with the calculated coldness and casual cruelty of someone who was absolutely accustomed to making definitive and unquestionable decisions in the merciless world of business and expected exactly the same blind obedience and total submission in all aspects of family domestic life. He rose from the table with deliberate and theatrically calculated movements, walking slowly to the French window that offered a privileged view of the garden illuminated by strategically positioned lights, and spoke coldly without even deigning to look directly at his daughter, as if he were dictating a completely routine business decision to a dispensable employee or cancelling an unfavorable commercial contract. Each word was carefully and cruelly chosen to make crystal clear that there would be no possibility of future negotiation, further discussion, or emotional appeal that could reverse the final sentence being pronounced at that historic and definitive moment. Michael remained completely motionless in his chair, with fists involuntarily clenched on the elegant table and jaw muscles visibly contracted, obviously divided between the genuine fraternal loyalty he felt for his older sister and the absolutely paralyzing fear of openly contradicting the authoritarian father, who had just literally offered him a golden future on a silver platter. The heavy and oppressive silence that dramatically settled in the room was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock on the wall and the distant sound of Nancy discreetly washing dishes in the kitchen. Your brother does need to study and qualify properly. He will support an entire family, build and significantly expand a lasting business empire. And what about me, Father? What exactly happens to me in this family equation you're calculating so coldly? The final and absolutely devastating ultimatum came like an official judicial sentence, pronounced with the same cold and inhuman naturalness with which Richard used to fire incompetent employees or cancel business contracts that no longer served his specific profitable interests. He returned to the dining table with measured and coldly calculated steps, rested his large hands, calloused from work, on the back of the leather chair where he had sat like a monarch throughout dinner, and finally looked directly and coldly into the dark and progressively watery eyes of his daughter, for the first time that fateful and transformative night. His words cut through the room's air conditioning like cutting words, loaded with casual cruelty and such deeply rooted sexism that he didn't even realize the absolute monstrosity of what he was saying to his own flesh and blood daughter. It was as if he were carelessly talking about the fate of a pet that had become inconvenient, not about the future of a person he had created and theoretically should love unconditionally. Grace literally felt the world collapse around her, like a devastating emotional earthquake, but heroically managed to maintain the external composure she had learned when dealing with life-or-death situations at the hospital, even as her heart was shattering into thousands of fragments inside her chest. "You have exactly 6 months to leave my house, definitively and permanently. Find a decent husband or get a job as a domestic somewhere." "Dad, you can't be serious about this. She's your flesh and blood daughter, for God Almighty's sake." Grace rose from the table with all the dignity she could muster, collected her leather purse, and determinedly walked toward the front door without saying another single word or looking back. Each step echoed on the polished marble like a definitive and irreversible farewell, as she internally processed the devastating emotional magnitude of what had just happened in her life. Behind her, she could hear Michael timidly trying to argue with their authoritarian father, but his words seemed distant and completely ineffective in the face of the decision already made and sealed. At the front door, she turned one last time to nostalgically look at the house where she had grown up and been happy, knowing deeply that she would never return as a beloved daughter, only as a stranger visiting painful memories of the past. "Stop dreaming big immediately, Grace. I won't spend even 1 more peso on you from now on." "Then it's officially decided, Father. 6 months is much more time than I really need to change my life." Grace slowly climbed the marble stairs of the mansion, each step echoing like a silent lament, while her father's cruel words still reverberated relentlessly in her wounded mind. Her bare feet touched the cold floor of the corridor leading to her room, the same corridor where she had played happily during childhood, now transformed into a path of exile and family rejection. The tears she had bravely held back during dinner finally began to run down her cheeks, leaving salty trails of pain and humiliation that she discreetly wiped away with the back of her hand. The room that awaited her was the same since adolescence, decorated with antique furniture that had belonged to Grandmother Catherine, but now seemed like a sanctuary where she could finally process the magnitude of the paternal betrayal she had just experienced. The door closed behind her with a soft click, isolating her from the hostile world that her own home had become in a matter of minutes. "How could he treat me like this after everything I've done for this family? 6 months. He really believes I'm just a burden to be discarded." Grace's room remained practically unchanged since she was 18, when she left for nursing school, maintaining the same delicate pastel-colored decoration that her grandmother Catherine had personally chosen for her beloved granddaughter. The walls were adorned with family photographs from happier times, when the family still seemed united and paternal love wasn't conditioned by the gender of the children. The twin bed with its hand-embroidered quilt occupied the center of the room, surrounded by a bookshelf filled with medicine and nursing books she had collected throughout her years of study. On the carved wooden dressing table, a few bottles of cheap perfume shared space with simple costume jewelry and a small jewelry box she had received from her grandmother on her 16th birthday. It was an environment that breathed simplicity and modest dreams, dramatically contrasting with the ostentatious luxury of the rest of the mansion that belonged exclusively to the male universe of the family. "This room holds so many happy memories, when Grandma was still alive to protect me. If she could see how her son treated me today, she would be ashamed of him." The longing for her grandmother Catherine hit Grace like an overwhelming wave, bringing vivid memories of whispered conversations and wise advice that the older woman used to share during the Sunday afternoons they spent together in the garden. Catherine had always been different from her chauvinistic son, a woman ahead of her time, who had built her own business when she was widowed young, raising Richard practically alone with a firm hand and a generous heart. Grace clearly remembered how her grandmother used to say that the women in the family possessed a special strength, a resilience that men often underestimated out of ignorance or fear. They were precious memories of a strong female figure who had been her greatest emotional support during her formative years, when the first signs of paternal chauvinism began to manifest more evidently. Catherine's absence in the last 5 years had left an enormous void in Grace's life, especially in moments like this, when she needed maternal guidance and protection the most. "Grandma always said I was special, that I had a greater destiny than Dad could see. If she were here now, she would never allow him to humiliate me this way. It was driven by a nostalgic and desperate impulse that Grace headed to the old mahogany dresser that had belonged to her grandmother, a heavy and imposing piece of furniture that had occupied a strategic corner of the room since she turned 15. Her trembling fingers searched for the secret drawer that Catherine had shown years ago, a hidden compartment that few knew about and that kept the matriarch's most important secrets. The wood creaked slightly when she applied pressure at the exact spot, revealing the ingenious mechanism that had been installed decades ago by a trusted carpenter. The compartment opened silently, exhaling a subtle lavender aroma that Catherine used to use to perfume her most precious belongings. Inside the secret drawer, carefully organized and preserved from time, were documents she hadn't seen in years, yellowed photographs and a letter sealed with red wax that bore her name, written in her grandmother's elegant and familiar handwriting. She always told me there was something important kept here for when I grew up. I never thought it would be precisely today that I would need her so much. Grace's hands visibly trembled as she carefully removed each item from the secret drawer, treating the documents as sacred relics that connected her desperate present to her grandmother's loving past. Among the old papers, she found birth certificates, property deeds with names she didn't immediately recognize, and photographs of her grandmother in her youth, when she was still an independent and successful businesswoman. The sealed letter magnetically drew her attention, weighing more in her hands than it should for its size, as if it carried within itself the weight of family secrets kept for decades. The name Grace was written on the front of the envelope in a firm and decisive handwriting, accompanied by a date that corresponded exactly to the 25th birthday she had completed just 3 months ago. It was as if Catherine had foreseen not only the date, but also the exact circumstances in which that letter should be opened, demonstrating an almost prophetic wisdom about the family's future. Why did she leave this specifically for when I turned 25 years old? And why do I have the feeling that she knew exactly what would happen today? The red wax came off easily when Grace warmed it between her fingers, revealing that the letter had been sealed with special care to withstand time, but yield easily when the right moment came. The inner paper was of superior quality, the type that Catherine used to use for important correspondence, and the blue ink from the fountain pen she loved so much had remained perfectly legible after all those years in storage. The first lines of the letter made Grace's heart race dangerously, as they contained revelations that completely changed her understanding of the family dynamics and her place in the hierarchy established by her father. Catherine had written with frightening clarity about her son's chauvinistic personality, predicting with surgical precision exactly how he would treat his daughter when she reached adulthood and began to demonstrate her own professional ambitions. Each word seemed to have been carefully chosen to prepare her granddaughter for the exact moment she was experiencing on that fateful night. My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this letter, it is because Richard has finally shown his true chauvinistic face. I always knew the day would come when he would try to limit your dreams because you are a woman. The letter continued, revealing surprising details about the family's true financial situation, information that Catherine had kept in absolute secrecy even from her own son during all the years they lived together in the same house. Grace discovered with growing astonishment and disbelief that most of the fortune that Richard publicly flaunted as the result of his business success was, in fact, a direct inheritance from his mother that he had invested and multiplied over the years. Catherine had been an extraordinarily astute businesswoman, accumulating properties and investments that she kept discreetly separate from her son's companies, creating a parallel estate that no one in the family suspected existed. The grandmother explained in the letter that she had made this strategic decision years ago when she realized that Richard was developing a patriarchal mindset that could harm his daughter's future. It was a revelation that completely changed the power dynamics in the family, showing that the true financial matriarch had been Catherine, not the son who boasted of being a self-made man. I left a special inheritance for you, separate from everything that belongs to your father and your brother. $25 million, 2 properties, and shares in a prosperous company that I secretly built. The impact of the revelations contained in the letter made Grace need to sit on the edge of the bed to avoid fainting, while mentally processing the magnitude of what she was discovering about her true financial situation. Her grandmother had created a specific legal condition for accessing the inheritance, requiring that her granddaughter be exactly 25 years old, and that her father had tried to prevent her from studying or forced her into marriage, criteria that had been fulfilled almost prophetically that very night. Catherine explained that she had consulted specialized lawyers to create a contestation-proof will, legally protecting her granddaughter's rights even if her son tried to interfere or question the judicial decision. It was meticulous planning that demonstrated not only unconditional love for her granddaughter, but also a deep understanding of her son's controlling nature and his tendency to use money as a tool for family manipulation. The letter ended with specific instructions on how to proceed to access the inheritance, including the name of the lawyer responsible for the documents and the codes necessary to activate the bank accounts that had been waiting for 5 years. Call Dr. Morrison tomorrow morning and mention the blue sapphire code that is at the end of this letter. He has all the documents prepared and has been waiting for your contact for 5 years. With hands still trembling from the adrenaline of the discovery, Grace picked up her cell phone and dialed Dr. Morrison's number that was carefully noted at the end of the letter, even knowing that it was already past 10 o'clock at night and that she would probably be disturbing the lawyer at home. The call was answered after 3 rings by a mature and professional male voice, who immediately showed recognition of the importance of the call when she identified herself as Catherine's granddaughter and mentioned the specific code that her grandmother had left in the instructions. Dr. Morrison explained that he had been Catherine's personal lawyer for more than 20 years and that he had been anxiously awaiting that call since the client's passing, keeping all documents updated and ready to be executed at the exact moment. His voice carried a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal affection, as he had known Grace since childhood and had always admired how Catherine worried about her granddaughter's future in the face of her father's misogynistic limitations. "Grace, my dear, I've been waiting for your call for exactly 5 years. Catherine predicted everything perfectly. Sois, you have just become one of the wealthiest women in the region. Can we meet tomorrow to sign the papers?" The official confirmation of her grandmother's words made Grace feel an intense mixture of relief, gratitude, and a growing thirst for justice that she had never experienced before in her life. Dr. Morrison detailed over the phone exactly what she had inherited: $25 million in diversified bank accounts, 2 commercial properties in prime locations that generated substantial monthly income, and 40% of the shares in a logistics company that Catherine had discreetly founded, and which was now worth a fortune in the market. It was an estate that instantly transformed her from rejected daughter to independent heiress, with sufficient financial resources to live comfortably for the rest of her life without depending on any man's approval or money. More importantly, it was an inheritance that came with a powerful lesson about planning, female independence, and the importance of protecting future generations against present prejudices. Your grandmother was an extraordinarily wise and foresighted woman. She knew exactly how Richard would react. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning at my office. Prepare yourself to sign many property transfer documents. After hanging up the phone, Grace remained seated on the bed for long minutes, silently contemplating the complete turnaround her life had taken in the space of a few hours. Her hands were still slightly trembling from the adrenaline of the discovery, and she needed to breathe deeply several times to process the magnitude of what she had just discovered about her true position in the world. The humiliation suffered during dinner now seemed part of a larger plan, a necessary piece in the puzzle that her grandmother had carefully assembled to ensure that her granddaughter received not just a financial inheritance, but also a valuable lesson about female strength and personal independence. The room around her remained the same, but she felt completely different, as if she had awakened from a dream where she was a powerless person to discover that she had always been a queen in disguise. Catherine had transformed paternal rejection into an opportunity for liberation, using her son's own misogynistic cruelty as a trigger to activate a protection mechanism that had been built years in advance. It was a brilliant strategy that only a woman who had faced her own challenges could have conceived with such precision. How did she manage to predict everything with such exactitude? It's as if she knew her own son's heart better than he did himself. It was a subtle and intelligent revenge that demonstrated how well the grandmother knew the nature of the men in the family and how willing she was to protect her granddaughter from the limitations they would try to impose. Grace rose from the bed and walked to the window that overlooked the garden where she had played as a child, observing the lights of the main house, where her father probably slept satisfied, believing he had definitively solved the problem of his rebellious daughter. The irony of the situation made her smile for the first time in months. While he celebrated his supposed victory, she had discovered that she possessed more real power than he had ever imagined having. Slowly, an idea began to form in Grace's mind, a plan that would do justice not only to her own repressed ambitions, but also to the memory of the grandmother who had sacrificed so much to protect her. She would not act on impulse or anger, but with the same strategic patience that Catherine had demonstrated in planning that inheritance during years of silence. Grandma didn't just leave me money. She left me power and freedom to choose my own destiny. I'll give them exactly what they deserve, but in my way and in my own time. 3 months had passed since that fateful dinner night, and Grace had played her role to perfection, behaving exactly as Richard expected a rejected daughter to behave in the face of a paternal ultimatum. During this strategic period, she had remained discreet in the mansion, adhering to rigorous work schedules at the hospital and avoiding any type of confrontation or discussion that might arouse suspicions about her true financial situation. On weekends, she pretended to look for housekeeping jobs and even went out on supposed romantic dates arranged by work colleagues, creating a convincing narrative of desperation and submission that fed her father's misogynistic ego. Richard observed with growing satisfaction what he interpreted as the inevitable capitulation of his rebellious daughter, frequently commenting to Michael about how women always ended up learning their place when confronted with financial reality. It was a carefully calculated performance that allowed Grace to organize her plans in absolute secrecy, while her father felt increasingly confident in his unquestionable patriarchal authority. See, Michael, 3 months of reality were enough for her to stop dreaming about impossible careers. Dad, maybe we should give her another chance. Grace has always been a good daughter. It was precisely at the end of the 3rd month that Richard decided to call the meeting that he considered to be the final blow to any remnant of rebellion that his daughter might still secretly nurture. He had spent weeks meticulously planning that meeting in Dr. Morrison's office, seeing it as an opportunity to legally formalize his decision to completely disinherit Grace and transfer the entire family inheritance exclusively to Michael. The meeting had been scheduled for Thursday afternoon, a strategic time that would allow him to resolve the family matter before the weekend and begin a new phase of the family dynasty without the burden of a problematic daughter. Richard had even invited Sophia, the 22-year-old girlfriend Michael had met in college, to witness the moment he considered historic for the definitive establishment of patriarchal order in the family. She was a blonde young woman from the upper middle class, daughter of prosperous merchants, who had fallen in love with Michael's charm and supposed inheritance, and whose presence at the meeting served to demonstrate that the son was already following the correct path of establishing a traditional family. Sophia, today you will witness how a delicate family matter is definitively resolved. Mr. Richard, I'm sure you know what's best for everyone. Dr. Morrison's office occupied the top floor of an elegant commercial building in the city center, with large windows offering a panoramic view of the main commercial and financial points of the region. The classic decoration in dark wood and leather tones conveyed the seriousness and tradition of a professional who had been serving the most influential families in local society for more than 3 decades. Shelves filled with legal codes and legal precedents occupied 2 entire walls, while diplomas and professional certifications adorned the wall behind the main desk, creating an atmosphere of unquestionable legal authority. Richard arrived punctually at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, wearing his best suit and accompanied by Michael and Sophia, all displaying confident expressions of those who were about to definitively solve an uncomfortable family problem. Grace had arrived 15 minutes earlier, as discreetly arranged with the lawyer, and was calmly waiting seated in one of the leather armchairs, wearing a simple but elegant business outfit that she had bought especially for the occasion. Dr. Morrison, I hope we have everything prepared to formalize Grace's exclusion from the family inheritance. Mr. "Richard, there are some legal issues we need to discuss before any signing." Richard immediately took control of the meeting, positioning himself standing behind the main chair as if he were presiding over a shareholders' meeting, and began to present his version of the facts with the authoritarian eloquence of someone who was used to being heard without interruptions. He meticulously detailed the last 3 months of Grace's inappropriate behavior, describing how she had failed to find a respectable husband or even a stable domestic job, thus demonstrating her fundamental inability to adapt to traditional family expectations. Michael remained visibly uncomfortable in his chair, avoiding looking directly at his sister, while his father systematically built the legal case for her total exclusion from the family inheritance. Sophia observed the scene with voyeuristic interest, clearly fascinated by the family power dynamic she was witnessing and by the millions of dollars that would soon be available exclusively to her boyfriend. Dr. Morrison listened patiently, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, but maintaining a neutral expression that revealed nothing of his true intentions or knowledge about the secret documents he had kept for 5 years. "As you can see, Doctor, my daughter had 3 months to prove she deserves to be part of this family. How she completely failed in all the opportunities that were generously offered to her." Richard's arrogance reached its peak when he began to detail specifically how the inheritance should be redistributed after Grace's official exclusion, treating her as if she were an inconvenient property that needed to be removed from the family inventory. He explained that Michael, as the only legitimate male heir, should receive not only his original share of the inheritance, but also everything that would theoretically belong to his sister, including a larger stake in the family businesses and full access to properties that he considered to be his absolute right. Sophia smiled discreetly, while mentally calculating the positive financial impact that decision would have on her future marriage to Michael, already visualizing the luxurious lifestyle she could enjoy as the wife of the sole heir to a consolidated family fortune. Grace remained in absolute silence, observing with growing fascination how her father completely revealed his cruel and manipulative nature before witnesses, inadvertently creating the perfect scenario for the revenge she had carefully planned during those 3 months of apparent submission. Michael will receive everything she could have inherited, plus a bonus for demonstrated family loyalty. As this is how you build a solid dynasty, eliminating weak and problematic elements. It was exactly at the moment when Richard was preparing to sign the first exclusion documents that Dr. Morrison calmly rose from his chair and interrupted the process with a professional authority that surprised everyone present in the room. The experienced lawyer walked to his personal file and removed a voluminous folder that had remained sealed for 5 years, containing documents that would completely change the power dynamic of that family meeting. His voice took on a grave and official tone when he announced that there was a pending legal matter related to Catherine's inheritance that needed to be resolved before any modification could be made to the distribution of the family assets. Richard frowned with growing irritation, clearly annoyed by what he perceived as unnecessary bureaucracy that was delaying his plans for the definitive exclusion of his rebellious daughter. Michael and Sophia exchanged confused looks, not understanding why the grandmother who had died 5 years ago could still have any influence over contemporary family decisions. "There is a pending legal matter related to Mrs. Catherine's inheritance that needs to be clarified immediately. Everyone present needs to hear the complete will before any documents are signed." The reading of Catherine's will began in an apparently routine manner, with Dr. Morrison reciting the standard legal formalities and official identifications of the beneficiaries, but gradually revealing information that left Richard increasingly pale and visibly disturbed. The lawyer read each clause of the document with a clear and measured voice, explaining how Catherine had carefully structured her personal inheritance completely independent of the assets she had allowed her son to manage during her lifetime. The first revelations were already surprising. The house where the family had lived for decades had never been legally transferred to Richard, officially remaining Catherine's exclusive property until her death. Michael began to fidget nervously in his chair when he realized that the information did not correspond to the family narrative he had grown up believing, while Sophia gradually lost the confident smile she had maintained since the beginning of the meeting. Grace remained impassive, but internally savored each moment of the revelation she had anticipated 3 months ago. The family's main property, known as the mansion on Jasmine Street, remains in Catherine's name. All decisions about this property must be made exclusively by the beneficiary designated in the will. The climax moment came when Dr. Morrison officially announced that Grace was the sole and exclusive heir to all of Catherine's personal assets, including $25 million in diversified bank accounts, 2 commercial properties that generated substantial monthly income, 40% of the shares in the region's most prosperous logistics company, and, the most devastating revelation of all, complete ownership of the mansion where the family had lived for decades, believing it belonged to Richard. The silence that settled in the room was so dense that one could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the opposite wall, while each person present mentally processed the catastrophic implications of that information for their future plans. Richard had turned completely pale, his clear eyes fixed on the lawyer, as if he were speaking in an incomprehensible foreign language, while Michael instinctively held Sophia's hand, who in turn had lost all color in her face, upon realizing that the golden financial future she had planned had just completely evaporated. Grace inherits $25 million, 2 commercial properties, and 40% of the logistics company. She is also the new legal owner of the mansion where you currently reside. It was at this moment of collective shock that Grace finally rose from her chair with an elegance and calmness that contrasted dramatically with the visible despair of the other family members. She had waited 3 months for this exact moment, carefully planning every word she would say and every gesture she would make to maximize the emotional impact of her revenge. Her voice sounded clear and controlled when she finally spoke, addressing directly the father who had spent decades underestimating her intelligence and capability. The words she had mentally rehearsed during sleepless nights of planning came out with surgical precision that cut deep into Richard's male pride, revealing that the problematic daughter had become the most financially powerful person in that room. Michael looked at his sister as if seeing a stranger, unable to reconcile the confident woman before him with the submissive sister he had observed over the past 3 months. "Dad, you have exactly 30 days to leave Grandma's house. It was never yours, and now it's officially mine, along with everything else you thought you controlled." Exactly 30 days after the devastating meeting in Dr. Morrison's office, Grace drove her new car toward the mansion that now legally belonged to her, observing with a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy how the electronic gate opened automatically upon recognizing her newly programmed remote control. During that transformative month, she had watched from a distance the gradual and relentless collapse of the empire that Richard believed he had built with his own hands, discovering along with him the bitter truth about his real financial situation. The detailed investigations conducted by the inheritance lawyers revealed that Richard's companies had been dangerously indebted for years, artificially sustained by million-dollar loans that used his mother's mansion as the main collateral in a financial operation that he had kept in absolute secrecy even from his own family. The house he flaunted as a symbol of his business success was, in fact, the only thing preventing his complete bankruptcy, and now that Grace was the legal owner, creditors had immediately called in all outstanding debts. It was a cruel irony that demonstrated how machismo and arrogance had blinded Richard to the reality of his own financial vulnerability. The day has finally come to settle all pending accounts with the truth. Dad always said women didn't understand business, but that's exactly what destroyed him. The scene awaiting Grace at the entrance of the mansion was both pathetic and symbolically powerful. Richard, wearing simple clothes she had never seen before, was personally carrying cardboard boxes full of his personal belongings to the curb, where a yellow taxi waited with its trunk open to receive the last remnants of a life of luxury that had completely disintegrated. His grey hair was disheveled and without the professional weekly cut he had religiously maintained for decades, and his face showed evident signs of sleepless nights and the devastating stress of watching an entire business empire crumble in a matter of weeks. The man who a month ago behaved like an authoritarian king in his own home now looked like a refugee carrying the debris of his lost identity, forced to leave the house where he had lived for decades, as if he were a defaulting tenant being evicted. When seeing his daughter approaching with a firm and determined step, Richard immediately stopped what he was doing and faced her with an expression that mixed shame, desperation, and a last remnant of the arrogance that had been his trademark throughout his life. It was an encounter he had tried to avoid during that entire month, but that he knew was inevitable at the final moment of the transfer of power that had been consummated between them. "Grace, my daughter, we need to talk about all this before I leave for good. Is there any way to reverse this terrible situation that has settled between us?" Michael appeared at the mansion door carrying a particularly heavy box, and Grace was shocked to see how dramatically her brother had changed in those 30 days of family crisis. The confident, well-dressed young man she knew had been replaced by a visibly worn-out man, with deep, dark circles and a curved posture that demonstrated the emotional weight of the situation that had befallen the entire family. His expensive clothes had been exchanged for simple, worn pieces, and his once perfectly combed hair now fell messily over the thin face that reflected weeks of irregular eating and constant anxiety. Unlike his father, who still maintained remnants of his defensive arrogance, Michael showed genuine signs of repentance and self-reflection, having spent the last month facing the cruel reality that he had never developed his own skills to survive without paternal financial support. His attempts to get a job had been systematically frustrated by the discovery that employers were suspicious of young people who had lived a lifetime of privileges without ever demonstrating personal initiative or independent work capacity. Even more painful had been Sophia's abandonment, who had ended the relationship by phone as soon as she discovered that he had no inheritance, brutally revealing how her romantic feelings were exclusively conditioned to the financial expectations she nurtured about the future. "Sister, I know I have no right to ask for anything after everything that happened to us, but I need you to know that these 30 days have made me see who I really was." The final confrontation between father and daughter took place in the garden that had been the scene of so many happy family memories, but which had now become the stage for a definitive reckoning about years of sexism, rejection, and humiliation systematically inflicted. Richard approached Grace with hesitant steps, as if walking on mined ground, and tried to assume a supplicating posture that grotesquely contrasted with the tyrannical authority he had exercised over the family for decades. His words came out rushed and desperate, in a pathetic attempt to rebuild bridges that he himself had burned with years of prejudice and cruelty, claiming ignorance about his mother's will, as if that justified decades of unequal treatment and contempt systematically directed at his daughter. Grace listened to him with a serene but unrelenting expression, allowing him to fully expose his vulnerability before responding with the surgical precision of someone who had carefully planned each word to maximize the emotional impact of her response. It was a moment of total power inversion that she had anticipated for months, and could finally savor the sweet revenge of seeing the man who had humiliated her begging for mercy that he had never shown when the positions were reversed. "My daughter, I swear I didn't know about your grandmother's will. If I had known, I would have handled everything differently. Please, you need to understand that I always wanted the best for you, I just didn't know how to express it." Grace's response echoed through the garden with an icy serenity that demonstrated how she had transformed during those months of planning and discovery of her true identity and personal power. Her words were pronounced with a calmness that dramatically contrasted with her father's desperate agitation, each syllable loaded with years of repressed pain and wisdom, painfully acquired through rejection and systematic humiliation she had suffered. She didn't shout or show visible anger, but her voice carried a moral authority that made it clear that the time for inadequate excuses and empty justifications had definitely passed, and that now it was she who defined the terms of the relationship between them. Richard tried to interrupt several times, but was silenced by the firm and determined look of his daughter, who had finally found her voice after years of being diminished and belittled by paternal sexism. It was a moment of emotional catharsis that symbolized not only Grace's personal revenge, but also the symbolic victory of all women who had been systematically oppressed by authoritarian and inflexible patriarchal structures. "You knew I was your blood daughter, Daddy. That was all you needed to know to treat me with respect. All these years you chose to diminish me, not out of ignorance, but out of pure and simple sexism." It was at this crucial moment of confrontation that Grace decided to reveal her plans for the inheritance she had received, demonstrating a greatness of spirit that contrasted dramatically with the moral smallness that Richard had demonstrated throughout his life. With a clear voice full of purpose, she explained in detail how she intended to use the $25 million to create an educational foundation that would offer full scholarships to low-income women who wished to specialize in medicine and other areas traditionally dominated by male prejudice. The foundation would bear Catherine's name, honoring the memory of the grandmother who had made that social transformation possible through her visionary planning and her deep understanding of the need to protect future generations of women against the limitations imposed by insecure and controlling men. Richard listened to the explanation with an expression of growing astonishment, realizing that the daughter he had rejected as inadequate was demonstrating a nobility of character and a social vision that he had never possessed, even with all his wealth and business power. It was a humbling lesson that demonstrated how a person's true value was not related to their gender or patriarchal approval, but to their ability to use resources and opportunities to benefit other human beings. I will create the Catherine Foundation to provide medical scholarships for women who have been rejected by their families. Sus, Grandma didn't leave me this inheritance to take revenge, but to transform suffering into opportunity for others. Michael approached timidly the place where father and daughter were talking, carrying on his shoulders not only the physical weight of the box he was transporting, but also the emotional weight of months of painful self-reflection that had completely transformed him. His words came out hesitantly and laden with a genuine humility that Grace had never seen before, demonstrating that the young man had finally understood how he had been a silent accomplice to paternal sexism during all those years of unquestioned privileges. He openly confessed how comfortable he had felt receiving investments and opportunities that were denied to his sister, admitting that his passivity in the face of family injustices had been equally harmful as his father's active cruelty. Michael revealed that the last weeks of financial difficulties and social rejection had been fundamental for him to develop real empathy for the experiences of humiliation that Grace had faced throughout her life, and that he now ardently wished to find a way to redeem his passive errors and contribute positively to repairing the damage caused. His voice trembled slightly when he asked permission to work at the foundation she was creating, not as a family favor, but as an opportunity to prove that he had genuinely changed and learned from the painful consequences of his previous moral omission. Sister, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness after years of complicit silence in the face of injustice. But if you allow me to work at the foundation, I promise to dedicate my life to repairing the harm I helped perpetuate. Grace's response to her brother's sincere request demonstrated an emotional wisdom and capacity for forgiveness that surprised even herself, revealing how the discovery of her own power had been accompanied by significant moral growth that completely differentiated her from the petty cruelty that had characterized the previous family dynamic. She looked deeply into Michael's eyes, looking for signs of genuine sincerity behind the words of repentance, and found there a real transformation that justified a carefully supervised second chance. Her decision to accept her brother's proposal was based not only on the fraternal love that had always existed between them, but also on the mature understanding that true revenge against sexism did not consist of perpetuating cycles of exclusion and punishment, but in creating opportunities for repentant people to actively contribute to building a more just and equal world. Michael received the news with tears of gratitude that flowed freely down his face, understanding that he was receiving a precious opportunity to rebuild his moral identity on more solid and ethical foundations. It was a moment of redemption that demonstrated how intelligent and conditional forgiveness could be more powerful than pure revenge, creating possibilities for social transformation that benefited society as a whole. I accept your proposal, Michael, but with the condition that you prove through concrete actions that you have really changed. The foundation will be a laboratory where you can demonstrate if you have truly learned the value of equality. The final moment of farewell came when Richard finished loading all his possessions into the yellow taxi that would take him to a modest rented apartment on the other side of the city, a place that represented a vertiginous social fall compared to the ostentatious luxury he had enjoyed for decades. Grace silently observed how the man who had been a dominant authoritarian figure in her life transformed before her eyes into a pathetic and diminished figure, carrying only a few boxes of personal belongings as the sole vestiges of a business empire that had proven to be built on false and unsustainable foundations. When Richard addressed her for the last time before entering the taxi, his words were a desperate appeal for some kind of reconciliation, or at least an acknowledgement that there was still some family bond between them. But Grace responded with an implacable serenity that made it clear that the relationship between them had been fundamentally and irreversibly altered. She showed no unnecessary cruelty, but also did not offer the emotional consolation he clearly desired, maintaining a respectful distance that protected her own mental sanity while allowing him to face the natural consequences of his sexist and authoritarian choices. I hope that one day you can forgive me, and that we can rebuild our family relationship. Joyce, I promise I will learn from these mistakes and become a better man if you give me that chance. Grace's final response echoed through the mansion's garden, like a declaration of personal independence and a manifesto on the true nature of the inheritance she had received from her visionary grandmother, revealing a deep understanding of how money and power should be used to create meaningful social transformations instead of simply accumulating personal luxuries. She stood for long seconds, observing her father's pleading face with a serene but resolute expression, before responding with words she had mentally rehearsed during weeks of reflection on that inevitable moment. Dad, for 25 years you had countless chances to be a better man to me. Every time you diminished me, every time you invested in Michael and ignored me, every time you laughed at my dreams, those were your opportunities for change. Now that you've lost everything is when you want to learn. Life doesn't work that way. Her words were pronounced with a serene dignity that demonstrated how she had transformed from a victim of family chauvinism into an active agent of social change, capable of using her new position of power to benefit other women who faced challenges similar to those she had overcome. Richard tried to approach, extending his hands in a desperate gesture of supplication, but she took a step back, maintaining the physical distance that symbolized the definitive emotional distance that now existed between them. Please, my daughter, I know I made terrible mistakes, but I am your father. That must mean something after all. It did mean something, Dad. It meant something when I was 15 and dreamed that one day you would be proud of me like you were proud of Michael. It meant something when I graduated as a nurse and you didn't even show up at the ceremony. It meant something that night at dinner, when all I wanted was your support to grow professionally. Richard heard these final words with an expression of painful recognition, finally understanding that he had drastically underestimated his daughter throughout her life, and that now it was too late to completely repair the damage caused by years of prejudice and systematic rejection. His tears began to silently flow, but Grace showed no compassion for that late and self-pitying suffering. The taxi slowly moved away down the Portuguese stone driveway, taking with it not just a defeated man, but also an era of patriarchal authoritarianism that had come to an end through the strategic wisdom of a woman who had learned to transform oppression into an opportunity for personal and social growth. Grandma didn't leave this inheritance to make me rich, Dad. She left it to make me truly free. Some people need to lose everything to understand that they never possessed anything really important in life. The morning light filtered through the tree leaves, dancing on the porch table where Emily and Lydia were having tea. Emily stirred the liquid in her cup gently, her red hair tied in a loose bun, green eyes shining as she talked about the idea of turning her own illustrations into a real gallery. Lydia, with grey hair and deep brown eyes, maintained a restrained smile, listening to every detail as if they were notes of a symphony. The soft aroma of mint rose in the air as they dreamed together, and Emily got excited as she showed a sketch of a logo with the gallery's name. It will be a welcoming space, Mom, with large canvases, natural light, and people feeling peace just by entering, said Emily, smiling sweetly. Lydia placed her hand on her daughter's and replied, "If anyone can create such a place, it's you." On the other side of town, Peter rummaged through the living room drawers impatiently. His face was rigid, jaw clenched, and blue eyes full of frustration. The black-haired man always knew how to point out flaws, but never how to recognize merits. He searched for his wallet as if someone had purposely hidden it, and muttered phrases only he understood. Instead of calling his wife, He dialed his father's number and huffed loudly as soon as he heard the voice on the other end. "She lost my wallet again, Dad. Everything this house has in beauty, it has in disorganization," said Peter, pacing back and forth. Harold took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Emily is dedicated, Peter. Maybe she just put it in the wrong place. Have you thought about asking nicely?" Peter laughed ironically and retorted, "She lives with her head in the clouds. It's like living with an adult child." On the porch, the wind blew softly, swaying Lydia's grey hair as she collected the cups. Emily stood up and gave her mother a long hug, resting her face on her shoulder as she did in childhood. Lydia held her daughter's hand for a few seconds and commented affectionately, "You have that glow on your face, like when you were about to receive a gift." Emily chuckled softly and, staring at the clear sky, said unhurriedly, "Today I feel light, Mum, as if I'm closing a cycle." Lydia tried to smile, but that strange comment kept reverberating in her mind, even as she walked to the car. Emily, distracted with the papers she left on the porch, didn't even notice she had forgotten her cell phone on the armrest of the chair. Before we begin, comment where you're watching this story from and subscribe to the channel to keep following. Peter hung up the phone and finally found the wallet in one of the pockets of his jacket, hanging on the back of the sofa. He grumbled to himself and sat down in front of the television, opening his wife's computer that was on the coffee table. He browsed through the folders and sighed, seeing hundreds of files with names of exhibitions, images of paintings, and messages exchanged with clients. He glanced over without interest and closed the lid forcefully. So much effort for nothing. "Art gallery doesn't fill the fridge," he muttered, as if each phrase was more bitter than the last. From the adjacent room, the clock marked the end of the morning, and he still hadn't asked where Emily was. Lydia arrived home and went straight to the phone, trying to call her daughter. It rang until it went to voicemail. She tried again. Then she sent a voice message, but nothing indicated it would be heard. She sat on the sofa with the blouse Emily had left there on a recent visit and ran her fingers over the embroidery on the collar. "You've always been distracted, my girl. But today something in me urges me to insist," she murmured, looking at the motionless phone. She called once more and left the device on her lap, waiting with her eyes fixed on the wall, as if that would bring some answer. In the early evening, Peter was sitting in the living room, watching some program with the sound louder than necessary. The intercom rang and he, irritated, got up slowly. When he answered, he heard the direct voice of a police officer asking him to come down. He went down grumbling, concerned about what might have happened in the building. As he opened the lobby door, 2 officers were there, serious, and one of them took off his hat respectfully. "Are you Mr. Peter, husband of Mrs. Emily?" asked the officer. Peter confirmed with a nod. "We regret to inform you that your wife suffered a serious accident this afternoon. She didn't survive." Peter blinked a few times, not immediately understanding. He brought his hand to his chin and with disconcerting coldness murmured, "But what about the house documents? What happens to them now?" At the same time, in another part of town, Lydia was still sitting with the phone in her lap when she heard the doorbell ring. She got up quickly and went to the door. Upon opening the door, she saw a police officer with a downcast face. "Are you Emily's mother?" asked the man, holding a cap between his hands. Lydia froze inside and nodded, feeling her legs weaken. "I'm sorry. She was involved in a traffic accident this afternoon. She didn't survive her injuries," said the officer. Lydia brought her hands to her mouth, staggering backward, being gently supported by him. "This can't be happening. My daughter, my Emily," she said between sobs, falling to her knees, hugging the forgotten blouse, as if it still held her daughter's scent. Peter returned to the apartment and threw himself on the sofa with a furrowed brow. He called his father, Harold, and delivered the news in a distant tone. "Emily is gone, Dad. The police were just here," he said, as if talking about closing a bank account. Harold remained silent for a few seconds and then responded, "This is very serious, Peter. You need to respect what happened. She was your wife." Peter sighed and retorted, "Yes, she was. Now I need to see what to do with her name on the house records." "Everything is in her name." Harold hung up in silence, with watery eyes, looking at a frame with a photo of Emily smiling at a past dinner. As dawn fell over the city, Lydia remained seated on the floor with the blouse in her hands. The silence of the house was only interrupted by her own sighs, which came like waves. At one point, she looked at Emily's photograph on the shelf, an image of her daughter at 7 years old, with paint on her face and holding a brush. "You had so much to do, my girl. So much beauty inside you," she said quietly. And as acute as the pain was, there was a silent conviction within her. Something was wrong with that fate, and she would find out what it was. In Peter's house, silence also took over, but the atmosphere was different. He walked among the rooms, making notes in a notebook and opening drawers. When he found a blue folder with Emily's name on the cover, he opened it and began examining the papers. "I need to understand what I can or cannot touch," he said to himself, with a cold and calculating look. On the porch, the chair where Emily used to sit swayed slightly in the wind, as if her presence still lingered there. But Peter didn't notice. He was too busy thinking about how to reorganize their assets. And while two houses experienced such different mourning, something was born in two hearts that would change the course of history. In Lydia, the seed of truth that needed to be unearthed. And in Peter, the rush to claim a space he never earned by merit. Lydia knew that the cycle of lightness her daughter mentioned wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much greater. "You tried to tell me, Emily. I will understand what it was," she thought, looking into the dark night like someone who heard in the silence the last message that still needed to be revealed. The scent of flowers filled the air, mixing with the muffled sound of conversations in the main hall. Emily's house was full of familiar faces and soft voices, all there to offer support, even though the atmosphere was silently tense. Lydia entered through the front door accompanied by Harold. She held a small arrangement in her hands, her eyes tired but attentive to every detail. Harold, quiet, observed the environment with sobriety. Peter wasn't around. One of the neighbors commented with some discomfort that he had left early and hadn't said where he was going. Lydia looked around, took a deep breath and murmured, "He can't even respect the house where she lived." Harold responded in a low tone, almost as a warning. "Or perhaps he's taking care of something he shouldn't." Upstairs, the door to Emily's room remained closed. Most people gathered in the living room, where photos of the young woman were arranged on a table. Lydia approached one of them and ran her fingers over the frame. It was an image of Emily painting outdoors, with her hair in the wind. A feeling of indignation grew in her chest. "She deserves more than this," she said softly, holding back tears. Harold placed his hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Let's keep our eyes open. Peter is not predictable." At that moment, a house employee approached discreetly and, with a confessional air, commented that Peter had mistreated Emily numerous times. Lydia held the woman's hand and spoke without hesitation. She was too much light for him. Shortly after, the door opened. Peter entered through the garage with determined steps and a dark folder under his arm. He wore a wrinkled dress shirt and had an impassive face. Harold watched him from a distance, attentive to every movement. Peter went straight through the room without greeting anyone and climbed the stairs as if fleeing from something. Lydia, silent, followed him with her eyes until he disappeared upstairs. Harold, already restless, whispered firmly, "He's hiding something. That folder isn't from the bank." Lydia frowned and responded with contained anger. "He thinks he can do this under our noses. But I'm going to end this today." Minutes later, Harold discreetly went upstairs to retrieve a memento from his daughter's room. While walking down the hallway, he saw Peter entering the office with that folder. Pretending not to notice, he continued walking, but heard the sound of a drawer being hastily opened. The door was ajar. Harold paused for a moment and, through the gap, saw Peter taking papers from the folder and placing them in a document box. He put everything away quickly and locked it with a key. Harold went downstairs without saying anything, but with an even more serious expression. Upon rejoining Lydia, he whispered in her ear, "He's hiding papers, the same ones that were in the folder. He's afraid something might leak." Lydia didn't hesitate. "Well, today I'm ending this charade." That same afternoon, the activity diminished. People were dispersing. The hall was now calmer, with only a few close family members remaining. Peter reappeared wearing a different shirt and sat down in the office. Lydia seized the opportunity. She entered the room and approached him firmly. Peter pretended to be reading something, but her tone of voice cut through the air. "You think you can manipulate everything after her death, but you're wrong. Today, at the wake, I'm going to end this charade. Emily knew everything. Peter slowly put down the papers and turned around. His eyes were fixed on her. His clenched jaw revealed his tension. "You're being dramatic, Lydia." "You're upset and I understand," he said, trying to sound calm. Lydia looked at him with contempt. "Don't try to calm me down. Not even today do you respect her memory." Peter stood up and left the room without responding. Lydia remained there for a few seconds, catching her breath, before heading to the bathroom in the hallway. She placed her purse on the counter and entered the room with firm steps. Inside, she washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror. She was determined. In that envelope she carried was Emily's written will, a document that could change everything. While she composed herself outside, Peter approached silently. His eyes were fixed on the purse left in the hall. He looked around, making sure no one was watching him. The hall was now practically empty. He took a deep breath and held the purse with trembling hands. "If she threatened me, it's because she has something here," he thought. With quick fingers, he unzipped it and searched through the contents. He found the envelope with Emily's name handwritten on it. Seeing what was inside, his eyes widened. It was a will. He quickly read the first line and saw there was no mention of him as a beneficiary. His heart raced. Without thinking twice, he put the envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket. He looked around again and saw, on a table near the door, the book where visitors wrote messages to the deceased. He tore out a blank page and folded it in the same format as the original envelope. He placed it inside the purse, closed it precisely, and put it back in the same place. "Now let's see if she's so certain about what she's carrying," he muttered. Lydia left the bathroom breathing more easily. She picked up her purse and headed to the car with Harold, who was waiting in front. Peter watched them from the upstairs window, trying to maintain a controlled expression. On the way, Lydia spoke to Harold in a low voice. "Today, when that priest finishes his speech, I'm going to go up to the podium. I'm going to read what Emily left in writing. Everyone will know who he really is." Harold nodded and replied, "If what's in that paper is what you say, then today marks the beginning of the end of his charade." Lydia held her purse tighter, not knowing what was really inside now. Inside the house, Peter paced back and forth, feeling a mixture of relief and anguish. He knew he couldn't make any more mistakes. He had already committed the biggest act of risk since Emily's death, and now everything depended on Lydia's reaction. If she tried to read the will and was discredited, he would emerge as the victim. "Let her come. Today I take control," he muttered in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie and trying to maintain a rehearsed expression. He felt that for the first time in a long time, he was ahead of the situation. The afternoon advanced and preparations for the wake were being finalized. Lydia and Harold arrived at the venue early, helping with the organization. On a table, various flowers and mementos of Emily were displayed, photographs, books, newspaper clippings. Lydia placed a small brooch from her daughter's childhood among the objects. "She used to wear this when she painted outdoors," she said with a choked voice. Harold held her hand and replied, "Today she will be heard, even if she is no longer here." Peter arrived a few minutes later, already greeting those present with restrained gestures. I avoided crossing long gazes with Lydia, but smiled discreetly at the others. The chairs aligned perfectly in the hall, illuminated by tall stained glass windows, and the aroma of white flowers filled the air with a mixture of beauty and melancholy. In the background, a sequence of photos showed Emily at different moments of her life, from childhood to adulthood, with a smile that seemed to hover above the general sadness. Lydia, wearing modest clothing with her hair tied back, walked silently to the reserved seat in the first row. Harold accompanied her closely, attentive to the smallest details, as if he could detect something hidden in the expressions of those present. Before sitting down, he held her by the shoulders and said, "If you're sure, do it." Lydia nodded slowly, with a firm gaze. "I am. Emily cannot be silenced even now." Peter was at the back of the hall, smiling in a restrained manner, wearing a dark suit that contrasted with the coldness in his eyes. He greeted everyone as if he were at a formal dinner, not at his own wife's wake. He shook hands, offered words of gratitude, and when someone cried, he merely lowered his head slightly, like someone pretending to feel something. With each step he took among the guests, he cast quick glances at Lydia's purse. "She doesn't know the embarrassment she's about to face," he thought, while continuing his round of greetings. When he passed near Harold, the two stared at each other for a second too long, and Harold commented in a low tone, "Are you afraid? Because you should be." The priest signaled for everyone to take their seats and walked slowly to the pulpit. In a serene tone, he began to speak about the light that Emily represented, about her artistic sensitivity and her unique way of seeing the world. As the words were spoken, Lydia kept her eyes fixed on Peter, who now sat on the other side of the room, with his face resting in his hands as if immersed in grief. Harold crossed his arms and observed with suspicion. "Fake mourning is easy to spot," he murmured. Lydia, without averting her eyes, replied, "He always knew how to lie. He just didn't know that I knew too." The speech ended with a prayer. The priest thanked everyone and asked for a moment of silence. The hall became motionless. Eyes turned to the altar where flowers and a frame with the image of Emily smiling rested. When the silence broke, it was by Lydia's voice. She stood up with a firm posture, walked to the pulpit, and turned to those present. Everyone exchanged glances, surprised by the unexpected movement. She then spoke clearly. "Emily left a will, and it was her wish that I read this here, in front of everyone." Murmurs filled the environment. Peter raised his head, tense. Lydia opened her purse and carefully took out the envelope. It's time for everyone to know what she really wanted. With all eyes on her, Lydia opened the envelope with slow movements as if holding something sacred. She took out the folded sheet and positioned it on the pulpit. She unfolded the paper, and upon looking at it, her hands froze. The paper was completely blank. No words, no trace, no sign that there had been a will there. Just emptiness. A deafening silence invaded the hall. Lydia blinked several times, trying to understand. She looked at the sheet, then at the purse, then again at the paper. This isn't right. There was something here," she said with a broken voice. The guests murmured. Harold stood up, restless. Peter rose forcefully. "Enough!" shouted Peter, his voice echoing like thunder in the hall. "You're expelled from our house!" The gazes turned to him, confused and shocked. Lydia remained motionless, still holding the blank sheet in her hands, as if she were holding something rotten between her fingers. Peter walked to the pulpit and pointed at her with theatrical indignation. "Would you have the courage to use your own daughter's wake to create a lying spectacle? This is sick." The commotion grew. Some people tried to approach to understand. Others whispered in an obvious manner. Lydia, trembling, only said, "But there was a will. She wrote it. She signed it." Harold came up to the pulpit and wrapped his arms around Lydia's shoulders, gradually moving her away. "Let's get out of here," he said in a low, firm voice, trying to protect her from the embarrassment. Peter crossed his arms, keeping his frozen gaze on the couple as they descended from the pulpit in silence. Lydia, still in shock, held the blank sheet as if it were a weapon that had failed to fire. As they passed by the guests, the faces varied between pity and judgment. Someone murmured that the pain must have made her invent things. Another commented that it was lamentable to transform a moment of mourning into a dispute. Lydia, with a muffled voice, only whispered, "She wouldn't let me go through this. She trusted me." Outside, the cool night air touched Lydia's face but brought no relief. She sat on one of the garden benches in front of the hall, and Harold remained standing beside her. The wind moved the tree branches slowly, as if everything around conspired to keep the atmosphere in suspense. Lydia breathed with difficulty, trying to understand what had happened. "I put it in the bag myself. I folded it carefully. I saw her name. It was real," she said without looking at Harold. He leaned over and replied firmly, "I saw you store it, and I saw him watching. He switched it." "I know he did." Lydia stared at Harold with watery eyes, her expression confused between pain and indignation. "But why? Why would he do that right now?" Harold didn't hesitate. "Because he knew. You threatened. You warned that you would read it. He had time, had motive, and had access." Lydia ran her hand across her face, remembering the moment she left her bag in the hall, the time she spent in the bathroom, the time Peter was alone before the wake. Everything was starting to fit together in a bitter way. "He must have taken the will and put something else in its place," she murmured. Harold nodded, and what he put was nothing, because that's what he wanted everyone to believe, that there was nothing. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. It was Peter, coming toward the exit, still with a tense expression. As he passed Lydia and Harold, he didn't say a word. He just glanced with an almost imperceptible smile as if he had won. Lydia watched him pass with her heart in flames. He thought he erased the truth, but he doesn't know who he's dealing with, she thought. Harold squeezed her shoulder and added, "We're going to find out how, and we're going to prove it. What he did today will have consequences." Lydia took a deep breath. The night was just beginning, and the truth was still alive somewhere. Emily had trusted her, and she wouldn't let that be in vain. Arriving home, Peter locked the front door with a slow movement, leaving behind the cutting silence that had hung since the previous night. Upon entering the house, he took off his jacket and threw it on the back of the sofa, going directly to the fireplace. The room was dark, illuminated only by the low flames that still resisted among the embers. In his hands, the original envelope with Emily's name trembled slightly. He removed the true document, looked at the deceased's signature for a second, and with a decisive gesture, threw the paper into the fire. The flames licked the paper as if they knew the value it carried. "It's over. No one will know anything anymore," he murmured, sitting in front of the fire with a satisfied smile. "She wanted to destroy me, but now not even her memory can get in my way." On the other side of the city, Lydia's house remained silent, but filled with restlessness. She and Harold were sitting side by side on the small living room sofa, still dressed in the clothes from the night before. Lydia's hands were interlaced, and her eyes fixed on a random point on the wall, as if reliving the moment of humiliation repeatedly. Harold, observing his friend's state, broke the silence carefully. "Lydia, did Emily use her personal computer a lot?" The question pulled her out of her stupor. She took a few seconds to respond, but nodded firmly. "Yes, she did. She wrote everything there. She said she liked to keep her ideas in secret folders." Harold stood up calmly. "Then perhaps the truth is still stored somewhere." They walked to Emily's room, which Lydia had preserved exactly as her daughter had left it. The air there had a soft lavender scent, and each object seemed to contain a fragment of her presence. The notebook rested on the desk, covered by a small embroidered towel. Lydia took a deep breath before picking it up, as if that simple gesture brought back all the years of living together. Harold took the device carefully, brought it to the living room table, and turned it on. The screen lit up slowly, revealing the wallpaper with a painting by Emily in blue tones. Lydia placed her hand on her chest and murmured, "She's still here. She left something for me." Harold looked at the screen and replied, "We'll find it. We just need to be calm and attentive." With attentive eyes, Harold navigated through the computer folders. Most had simple names like projects and clients, but in the lower corner was one titled Legacy. He paused the cursor over it and looked at Lydia, who sat down beside him, distressed. Harold clicked. Inside the folder, just a single file named Final Will signed. He opened the document, and the words appeared on the screen like a whisper from beyond. It was Emily's will, digitally signed, dated the previous week. Lydia began to read in a low voice, her eyes watering. "I leave everything to my mother, Lydia, who has always been my foundation, my light, my true family." Harold squeezed her arm and said, "Here it is. Here is what he tried to erase." Lydia slid her fingers across the screen, reading each line carefully. The house, the savings, the copyrights to her works, everything was intended for her mother. The only mention of Peter appeared in the penultimate paragraph, "I leave nothing to someone who never saw me as a human being." The words pierced through Lydia like a firm blade, not from pain but from confirmation. Emily knew. Emily had become aware of everything. "She did this to protect me, even knowing I would suffer afterward," she murmured. Harold nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "She didn't want him to have anything, and now it's in our hands to prove it." They spent the next few minutes printing the document and making copies on a flash drive. Harold handled everything with precision, while Lydia, still shaken, looked for any notation indicating with whom Emily had formerly registered it. They found no lawyer's name. Lydia searched through the agenda, notebooks, even the drawers in her daughter's room, but there was nothing indicating the professional's name. "She must have thought she'd have time to tell later," said Lydia, carefully sifting through papers. Harold leaned against the door and crossed his arms. Or maybe she wanted to do everything quietly, so as not to alert him. Dawn was breaking when they sat down on the sofa again, exhausted, but certain that the first step had been taken. The silence of the house was now different. It carried the weight of responsibility. Lydia held the printed copy of the will as if it were her daughter's last embrace. She knew he would react this way. She predicted everything. She just didn't imagine she would leave so soon. Harold, still with the notebook on his lap, looked at her and said firmly, "Now we need to find the lawyer. Without him, this might be worth nothing." Lydia took a deep breath, determined. "I will remember something, even if I have to relive every conversation we had in the last year." Famesti, with the document in hand, Harold suggested taking the flash drive to his technical support to make more copies and store it safely. Lydia handed over the file as if it were a treasure. While he prepared to leave, she sat in Emily's room once more. She looked at the paintings her daughter had created still hanging on the walls. She picked up a notebook and leafed through it calmly, looking for clues. Some pages were full of ideas, others with poems, and one in particular had an underlined phrase, "Talk to Gregory about digital validity." Lydia read it 3 times and repeated it quietly. Gregory. That must be his name, his. Harold returned in the early afternoon and found Lydia holding the notebook with the page marked. She showed him the notation, and he wrote the name on a piece of paper. "This is a start. Let's look for this Gregory." If she trusted him, it's because he knew what he was doing. Lydia stood up with difficulty, but her gaze was that of someone who had found direction again. "He will help us. I feel it." Emily trusted him, and I trust her. Harold put the paper in his pocket and replied, "We'll find him, even if it takes all day. But someone will have to explain how to formalize this." With the name in hand, Harold opened the computer again and began searching for records with that name linked to digital registrations or law practice. Meanwhile, Lydia returned to the Legacy folder and began to examine the details of the file. Within the same folder was a second document, less detailed, like a preliminary version. In it, Emily had written a draft of what she intended to leave in the final will. It was almost identical to the signed document, but the tone was even more personal. Lydia read in silence, feeling the weight of her daughter's words. "If something happens, I want to ensure my mother is safe and that no one manipulates what I built." Lydia closed her eyes and pressed the paper against her chest. "You will not be silenced, my daughter, I swear." The clock marked the end of the day when Harold rose from his chair with an alert expression. He had found 2 possible records with Gregory's name linked to independent legal consultancies. None of the phone numbers worked. Lydia, determined, suggested they go to the addresses the next day. "If he's still there, we'll find him. And if he's not, we'll keep looking." Harold took the notebook, the printed documents, and the flash drive. "We'll start early tomorrow. But today we've already won the first battle." Lydia looked at the sky through the window. Night was coming again, but now with a glimmer of hope. Emily had trusted, and that was all she needed to continue. The morning began with news that made Lydia rise from her chair as if she had received an electric shock. Harold came through the door with the newspaper folded in his hands, his eyes fixed on the front page. As he extended the paper, he revealed a headline surrounded by a large photo. "Widower honors wife with posthumous exhibition." The image showed Peter next to Emily's painting, smiling for the cameras, with a sign behind him that read, "Peter and Emily Collection, a creative journey." Lydia squinted to make sure of what she was reading. "He's using her name, as if it were his too," she muttered. Harold replied with contained anger, "And apparently, he's taking credit for authorship. This has gone too far." Lydia and Harold sat in front of the computer, as if every second were precious. They opened Emily's email again, searching more carefully. In the sent messages, they found one titled "Confidential Will," sent to a contact named Gregory Hart. Upon opening the content, they saw a direct text where Emily said she had finalized the legal terms with him and that, in case of urgency, everything was with him. At the top of the message, a header with a residential address caught their attention. She trusted him. "And if she sent this, it's because she left something with him," said Lydia. Harold firmly wrote down the address. "Let's go there now. If he's there, he'll tell us the truth." The house was on a secluded street, surrounded by old trees and silence. It was a modest construction, with closed wooden windows and a low gate that creaked at the slightest touch. Lydia knocked on the door twice, then 3 times. She called out the name from the email. No response. Harold walked around, checking if there was movement inside. Nothing. The house seemed empty for days. "He must have left town," said Harold. Lydia took a paper from her purse and began to write a letter in her firm handwriting, explaining who she was, what they were looking for, and the urgency in her words. She carefully folded it and attached it to the gate with a clip. "If he returns, he'll see this, and if he has a conscience, he'll contact us." Back in the city, Peter smiled before cameras, posing next to Emily's works as if they were extensions of himself. On each painting, a small metal plaque bore both their names, joined as if they were co-authors. A reporter approached and asked about the creative process. Peter, with a measured expression, answered, "Emily and I were always partners in everything." "This exhibition shows how much we built together," another reporter insisted, asking about the copyrights of the works. Peter responded with cynical naturalness. "Every registration she made went through me. Her art was our life." He concluded with a rehearsed phrase, "My mission now is to keep alive the memory of what we were." Lydia watched the interview on television, with glazed eyes and hands gripping the chair's armrest. Peter's speech made her burn inside. He's destroying what she created, turning into a lie what was pure. Harold, standing next to the bookshelf, commented, "He's trying to build a version of himself that never existed, and he'll be believed. If we do nothing." Lydia stood up decisively. "We have to prove that all this is a performance, that he erased the truth and is now shaping another. But we need that lawyer. We need Gregory." Night fell with the weight of a day without answers. Lydia sat in Emily's room, surrounded by her daughter's belongings. In her hand she held one of the brushes used by her, as if that gesture could bring her back. On the other side of the house, Harold organized the documents and digital copies they had made. The clock marked the beginning of dawn when the phone in the living room rang. Lydia ran to answer it, her heart pounding in her throat. On the other end, a male voice, calm and firm, identified himself as Gregory. "I received the letter. I'm sorry for your loss. And yes, I was responsible for the will." Lydia pressed the phone against her face. "Do you have something from her? Do you still keep it?" Gregory responded with assurance. "If she left me something, it's kept safely." Harold approached Lydia with attentive eyes, trying to hear what was being said on the call. Lydia kept her gaze fixed on the floor while speaking. "Can you meet us? It's urgent. Something serious has happened." On the other end, Gregory explained that he was out of town, resolving personal matters. "I'll be back in 2 days. I can meet you as soon as I return. Don't worry. If she trusted me, it's because she knew what she was doing." Lydia thanked him with a choked voice. Upon hanging up, she looked at Harold and said firmly, "He exists, and he knows. We just need to wait." Harold responded without hesitation. 2 days, we can hold on for 2 days, but he better be telling the truth." The next day, Peter gave another interview, this time for a local radio station. He spoke with the tone of an exemplary widower, mentioning how Emily's art was a legacy that he now carried alone. When questioned about Lydia, he simply said, "Pain has made her lose her balance. I don't blame her." Lydia heard everything sitting in the living room, her eyes glazed over at the wall. Harold turned off the radio angrily. "He is burying you along with your daughter." Lydia shook her head and replied, "But I'm still standing, and soon with evidence in hand." The following hours were marked by silence and restlessness. Lydia reviewed every conversation she had with Emily in recent months, looking for clues about Gregory, about anything that might prepare the ground for their reunion. Harold spent the time organizing digital files, separating copies and printing new documents. At the end of the day, they sat at the table exhausted, but with hope still burning. Lydia held her daughter's notebook and said, "She knew the truth could be hidden. That's why she left more than one key. And we found the first one." Harold nodded with his eyes fixed on the paper. "The second is in Gregory's hands. When he returns, this story changes." Peter walked through the main room with a decoration catalogue in his hands, analyzing the sofa that had belonged to Emily, as if it were just any piece of furniture. He pointed to it and ordered it to be removed that very morning. In less than an hour, 2 pieces of furniture were replaced by modern versions without color or affection. The paintings that Emily had hung with such care were removed from the wall and placed in a corner, where they began to be stacked. In the kitchen, the cook watched in silence as he gave orders with disdain. "We're going to transform this into something more practical, without so much of a childish gallery look," he said, pointing to a canvas with colorful strokes. The cook looked at him with disgust and muttered, "You are burying her soul." Lydia and Harold observed everything from a distance, leaning against the other side of the street, inside the parked car. They had spent much of the morning discreetly watching the coming and going of trucks and deliverymen. It was as if Peter was hurriedly removing every trace of Emily. Lydia narrowed her eyes with each piece of furniture being taken away. That house was her soul. Everything she loved he is erasing. Harold, with his arms crossed, replied, "He wants to get rid of everything before the truth returns. He's clearing the ground for the lie to prosper." Lydia nodded, holding tightly to the copy of the will. "But he will have to return everything he took." Late in the afternoon, the cook left through the front door with a small suitcase in her hands. She walked hurriedly, without looking back. Lydia recognized her from afar and immediately got out of the car, intercepting her on the sidewalk. "Are you leaving?" she asked. The woman, visibly shaken, answered with a choked voice, "I can't stand to see what he's doing anymore. That house no longer has her presence. He erased everything, as if she had never lived there." Lydia thanked her with a silent nod. She returned to the car with more conviction. "That's it. Now it's public. We need to show this to people." Harold looked at her and added, "Let's find someone who has the courage to publish the truth." The next day, Lydia and Harold met with a known editor of a small but respected newspaper for its independence. They brought a copy of the will, images of the exhibition, and accounts of Peter's behavior after the death. The journalist listened to everything carefully, noting every detail. When Lydia showed the article from the previous newspaper, where Peter presented himself as co-author of the works, he raised his eyebrows. "This will raise questions, especially if she left a will in your favor." Lydia responded firmly, "She left everything to me, and he's pretending it doesn't exist." The editor closed the notebook and said, "We will give voice to this. Someone needs to." By the end of that same afternoon, an article was published in the digital version of the newspaper with the title, "The Other Version of Emily's Legacy." The report included excerpts from the will, images of the house being emptied, and the testimony of witnesses who saw the renovations. Lydia and Harold read the text in silence, sitting side by side on the sofa. "Now it's not just us who know," said Lydia with teary eyes. Harold kept his gaze fixed on the screen. Now he will need to explain why he is erasing the name of the one who created everything. At Peter's house, the phone rang insistently, but he ignored it. Sitting at the table in the remodeled living room, he observed the new decorative paintings, as if trying to convince himself that this was the right space. He picked up the next morning's newspaper, but found nothing about him. Only at night, when he opened the internet, did he see the headline displayed. He was silent for a few seconds, then slammed his hand hard on the table. "She's trying to destroy me even in death," he said, clenching his teeth. He walked in circles around the room. "But this changes nothing. The will doesn't exist. They can't prove it." He smiled coldly. "They're betting too high." At the end of the night, Lydia and Harold were exhausted. They sat on the porch of the house, watching the streetlights go out one by one. Lydia's phone rang, breaking the silence. She answered immediately. On the other end, Gregory's voice sounded calm but firm. "I'm back in town. I read your letter, and I believe we need to talk as soon as possible." Lydia held the device with both hands. "We have the digital will, but he destroyed the physical one. He's trying to take everything." Gregory paused before responding. "If she left me something, it's safely stored, and it can help you." Lydia took a deep breath. "Can we meet tomorrow morning?" Gregory didn't hesitate. "I'll be waiting. Give me an address." As she hung up, Lydia brought her hands to her face. Harold approached and waited for confirmation. "He's back. He's ready to see us." "Tomorrow morning," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Harold placed his hand on her shoulder and spoke calmly. "Then tomorrow begins the part he won't be able to erase. Not with renovation, not with lies, not with interviews." Lydia looked at the dark sky and whispered, "If she left it in his hands, it's because she trusted him. And I'll trust him too. Harold nodded, with a steady gaze. Tomorrow the truth will walk with us, and he'll need to run to keep lying. With the meeting set, Lydia gathered all the documents again. She put the copies of the will, the emails, the exhibition prints, and the photos of the renovated house in a folder. Harold prepared the car, reviewed the address, and adjusted everything for the following morning. Before sleeping, they sat once more in Emily's room, where her paintings were still hanging. Lydia caressed one of the frames and said, "We're getting close. Just one more step." Harold looked at his daughter's image and added, "Tomorrow she'll exist again, as she always was." And with that certainty, they left the light on in the room, as if her presence still lived there. The sun had barely touched the windows when Lydia and Harold parked in front of Gregory's house. It was an old building, surrounded by tall trees and a clean but discreet garden. Lydia tightly gripped the strap of her purse in her lap, as if she still needed to hold on to some physical proof that all of this was real. Gregory opened the door before they even rang the bell, as if he had been waiting for them. He was a man of quiet speech, serene expression, carefully combed grey hair, and brown eyes behind small glasses. He invited them in with a gesture and a short phrase, "I've prepared for this day." Inside the house, the environment was silent and orderly, with antique furniture and an atmosphere of trust. Lydia and Harold sat in front of a dark wooden table, where Gregory placed a small key ring on a metal safe embedded in the wall. With calm movements, he turned the combination and removed a leather folder from inside. Upon opening it, his fingers respectfully touched the document. "Emily came to me a few months ago. She said she needed to protect what she loved." He pulled out a sheet with official seals and signatures. Lydia held her breath. Gregory continued, "She left everything to you, with digital and physical recognition, and she included an observation about Peter." Gregory handed the paper to Lydia, who took a few seconds to focus on reading it. Emily's name appeared several times, alongside words confirming the donation of the house, savings, and copyrights. At the end, a phrase highlighted in black ink, "I leave nothing to someone who never saw me as a human being." Lydia felt her eyes burn, but she didn't cry. She just pressed the paper against her chest. Harold then spoke. "She knew he would try something. That's why she sought you out." Gregory nodded slowly. "She feared being silenced. That's why she left a copy with me and said, 'If something happens, my mother will need this more than anything.'" Harold stood up with momentum, already taking the cell phone from his pocket. "We're going straight to court. We have everything we need." Lydia was still holding the will, but her eyes were fixed on Gregory's. "She trusted you, and you kept everything with such care." Gregory smiled, but his eyes were also watery. She was stronger than she appeared, and sadder than she let show. Lydia nodded slowly. "I should have asked more. She always smiled, even when she carried the world on her back." While Gregory returned to secure the safe, Harold was already speaking with the city's public attorney, scheduling an urgent appointment. Lydia observed the folder on the table. "This paper is all she left us, but it's also the only way to recover the truth." Harold looked at her firmly. "And we'll do it. We'll prove who she really was, and remove Peter from the shadow he created." Gregory then returned to the room and handed a second, simpler copy for immediate legal use. "Take this now. The original will remain stored should you need to prove authenticity." With the documents in hand, Lydia and Harold thanked them and said goodbye. Outside, the sun finally warmed the morning, but the weight in their hearts was still heavy. In the car, Lydia kept the envelope on her lap as if holding something sacred. She trusted so much, even knowing the end could come without warning. Harold started the engine and murmured, "And now it's our turn to trust. The system will hear us. Peter won't win this time." Lydia looked out the window, watching the city pass by, as if everything was moving faster now. When they arrived at the courthouse, they went straight to the filing department. The clerk immediately recognized Emily's name because of the recent exposure. Harold quickly explained the situation while Lydia handed over the documents. The legal team analyzed the papers, verifying the seals and signatures. A woman from the team stood up to call the person responsible for urgent case registration. A few minutes later, they were in a private room with a legal analyst examining the original will. "This document is legitimate, and it can be used to initiate the process. Do you intend to report fraud?" Harold responded firmly. We have sufficient evidence to prove that Peter hid and destroyed a legal document. We want to initiate action immediately." Lydia then detailed everything that had happened: the day of the funeral, the switched envelope, the attempt at public demoralization, and the exhibition of works with false authorship. The analyst noted everything, and at the end requested digital copies to complete the file. Harold connected the flash drive and handed over all the files. "She left us the trail. We just followed it." Lydia added, "He mocked her memory. He'll have to answer for every lie." The man finalized the filing. "In the coming days, the summons will be issued, and he will have to appear at the hearing. What he destroyed, justice can restore." As they left the building, Lydia and Harold walked unhurriedly. They knew there was still much ahead, but each step seemed firmer now. Lydia spoke, without taking her eyes off the street. "She's no longer here, but everything she did can still flourish, and no one will erase that." Harold agreed with a slight smile. He thought he was alone on stage. Little does he know the show hasn't even begun. As they got into the car, Lydia hugged the envelope again and this time allowed herself to smile. "Emily trusted in tomorrow, and we are starting to build it today." Back at Lydia's house, they put the papers in safekeeping. Lydia prepared tea as she used to do on mornings with her daughter, and they sat in silence for a few minutes. It was as if each sip also warmed the memory. Harold then took out a sheet of paper and began to list the next steps, notifying the press, informing those involved in the exhibition, gathering witnesses to the envelope switch. Lydia watched, attentive. "We'll unmask him where he likes to appear most, in public." Harold continued without taking his eyes off the list, and with the same voice he tried to silence, Emily's. The clock marked the end of the morning when a notification arrived on Lydia's phone. The newspaper that had published the report on the authorship of the works was requesting an interview. They wanted to hear the true story. Lydia looked at Harold, who simply nodded. "It's time to say what she couldn't say. Let's show that her truth is stronger than any fabricated lie." Harold held her hand tightly. "And we'll do it with every word he tried to hide. It's all recorded, and now it will all echo." 2 weeks later, Peter found an envelope with the justice seal at his door. Tearing open the seal, he read with widened eyes each line that confirmed what he had feared so much. He was being formally sued for forgery, destruction of a legal document, and misappropriation of property. His hands began to sweat, his chest tightened, and he threw the paper against the wall. The house now seemed smaller, stifling, surrounded by walls that were finally beginning to collapse. "They won't succeed, I still control this story," he muttered, staring at his own reflection in the window glass. Without thinking, Peter drove to Lydia's house, parking in front with the engine still running. He got out with hard steps and entered without being invited. Lydia, sitting in the armchair with a notebook on her lap, didn't stand up. Peter pointed his finger, trembling with rage, and shouted that she was destroying his life with lies. Lydia remained firm, without changing her breathing. "You'll pay for this, you crazy old woman. I'll spread everything I know about your family," he vociferated. Without raising her voice, she pressed the button on the small recorder in her hand and said, "Continue, Peter. Continue digging your own grave." Harold appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a cloth and observing Peter with a look of weariness and contempt. He walked up to him and spoke calmly, yet firmly. "Your own father is against you. Imagine who else will walk away." Peter stepped back, realizing he was alone in this war. As he left, he slammed the door shut, but said nothing more. "He's beginning to realize he has nowhere left to hide," said Harold, calmly returning to the table. The next morning, Lydia read with surprise the news that the art gallery had removed all works signed by Peter. The justification was clear: fraud in authorship. Headlines exposed his attempt to appropriate his deceased wife's art. Lydia scanned the photos of the removed works and felt a silent relief. "Emily, your voice is beginning to be heard," she whispered, as she placed the article in a folder marked with her daughter's name. Gregory arrived at court to give his testimony, wearing a dark suit and bringing with him a serenity that commanded respect. In his testimony, he confirmed the authenticity of the will, the digital signature and physical recognition. He reported how Emily blindly trusted her mother and feared that Peter would ruin everything she had built. The judge listened attentively, taking notes and nodding. She said Peter was a shadow. "Today he is merely noise," Gregory concluded, with a look laden with truth. The preliminary hearing continued, and faced with incontestable evidence, the judge recognized the validity of the will delivered by Gregory. Peter remained silent, without even raising his gaze. At the end, the judge determined that all assets should be immediately returned to the legal heir, Lydia. The decision was read aloud, and each word seemed to weigh like stone on Peter's shoulders. Justice isn't swift, but when it arrives whole, thought Lydia, firmly holding Harold's hand. Hours later, officers arrived at the house to deliver the eviction order. Peter, stunned, was instructed to vacate the property within 48 hours. Without protest, he began gathering his belongings in boxes, each object a reminder of what he had lost. The curtains, the replaced paintings, everything now seemed out of place. Meanwhile, the cook who had resigned appeared to collect her things, and seeing him there just shook her head in silence. "You killed the soul of this house when you erased her presence," she said as she left. The next morning, Lydia woke up to a call from the local press. Articles were starting to pop up, featuring interviews with people who knew Emily, and refuting the image Peter had tried to build. A reporter asked if she wanted to comment on the return of the house. Lydia took a deep breath and only replied, "I didn't recover a house. I recovered my daughter's dignity." After that, she hung up and walked to Emily's old room, now empty, but with walls still impregnated with the memory of who lived there with truth. Leaving the courthouse, after the confirmation of all decisions, Peter crossed paths with Lydia in the lobby. His eyes were filled with hatred, red, defeated, but still proud. He walked slowly toward her, as if expecting a confrontation. Lydia didn't back down. When he stopped in front of her, she raised her chin, looked into his eyes, and said firmly, "Emily always knew you didn't deserve even the ground she walked on." Peter didn't respond. He just turned his back and left in silence. That night, Harold and Lydia sat on the porch observing the clear sky. Between them, a folder with documents already forwarded for the final procedures. The pain of Emily's absence still lived in every corner, but there was also a sense of justice fulfilled. Lydia held Harold's hand and said, "She's gone, but left a trail of courage, and now no one will erase that anymore." The silence that enveloped them wasn't one of grief, but of relief. Their silence that said the worst had passed. Peter stared fixedly at the cracked mirror of the small apartment where he now lived, with stained walls and worn carpet that complained with each of his steps. His eyes, once cold, were sunken and moist, and his poorly trimmed beard didn't hide the despair stamped on his face. On the table, some scattered coins, overdue bills, and a torn envelope carrying the eviction notice. He had sold the car, sold the furniture from the old house, and even the few personal items that remained, but nothing seemed enough to escape ruin. In the living room, a forgotten painting by Emily, covered by a thin cloth, caught his attention like a silent ghost that refused to leave. He approached, pulled the cloth slowly, and faced the smile of the woman he said he loved, but whom he had betrayed with the worst kind of neglect. "She looked at me like this the day I said I didn't have time to talk, and now this is all that's left." He let himself fall onto the torn sofa, whispering, "All that she was is here, and I was only capable of erasing." At that same moment, in another part of the city, Lydia was finishing aligning the last details of the gallery. The newly installed sign gleamed under the morning sun, with soft and firm letters that read, "White Scar." The walls of the space shone with light tones, and Emily's paintings were arranged with delicacy and respect, each accompanied by a small plaque telling the story behind the work. Children, accompanied by teachers, explored the rooms with curiosity, while Gregory adjusted the final touches in the interactive exhibition room. Lydia observed everything from a distance, with teary eyes and an upright posture, like someone carrying the weight of many silences overcome. "You didn't die, Emily. You just turned into light, and now you illuminate every gaze that enters through these doors," she said, emotional, as she touched the first hanging frame. "My daughter was art. My daughter was strength. And today, she is eternity." That late afternoon, the gallery filled with people. Old friends of Emily, former students, artists from the city, and residents who had followed the story from afar. Harold arrived punctually, wearing a simple but impeccable jacket. He walked up to Lydia with slow but determined steps and handed her a small white flower he had taken from his garden. "She liked these," he said with a firm and affectionate voice. Lydia held the flower delicately, fixing her eyes on the colored stained glass that framed Emily's face, illuminated by the last rays of the sun. "Today is not a tribute, Harold. It's a new beginning. I promised her that I wouldn't let her fade, and I kept that promise. She lives here. She lives in me." When the inauguration ceremony began, Lydia climbed onto the small stage set up in the center of the gallery, where everyone could see her. The emotion was visible in every feature of her face, but her voice came out firm, loaded with truth. She told stories of Emily's childhood, of drawings on walls, notebooks full of colors, of the first improvised exhibition in the backyard. She said that even in the shadows of a cold marriage, her daughter never stopped creating. Emily resisted where many would have given up, and she resisted with art, with beauty, with soul. This gallery is the body she left to continue walking among us. The people with bright eyes fell silent with respect. My daughter was not a victim. She was hope. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Peter was finishing packing his last clothes in an old suitcase. The apartment he had managed to rent with the little he had left was dark, stuffy, and sad. He sat on the closed suitcase and looked around. Nothing resembled the comfortable life of before, and not even the walls knew what comfort meant. Upon opening one of the last boxes, he found one of Emily's handkerchiefs carefully folded. He smelled the fabric and closed his eyes, as if he could go back in time. "You trusted me, and I did everything the opposite. I lied. I stole. I erased you, as if you were nothing." Finally, he held the handkerchief against his chest, and for the first time cried without restraint. "I destroyed what I never had the right to touch." At the same moment in the gallery, Gregory approached Lydia with a contained smile. "Visitation has already exceeded 100 people just this morning," he said with satisfaction. "And they've already asked if there will be workshops, traveling exhibitions, projects with schools." Lydia smiled with gratitude and a gleam of pride in her eyes. "This gallery will live, Gregory. It will grow and reach people who never knew Emily, but will feel what she left behind. They will feel what it's like to have a soul drawn in lines and paints." Gregory nodded, lightly touching her shoulder. "She told me once that she was only afraid of being forgotten. That will never happen." Lydia responded softly, as if it were for Emily. "Now everyone will remember. Everyone will know who you were." At another moment that night, Harold was talking with a group of young people in front of the wall where Emily's paintings from the Reflections series were displayed. He told how she would spend hours painting in the light of the porch, always in silence with a cup of tea and distant eyes. She saw what no one else could see, and even when she wasn't heard, she never stopped speaking through colors. A teenage girl interrupted him with a sparkle in her eyes. "It's as if she was still here. I've never seen anything so alive." Harold smiled with a choked voice. "She is. Every stroke here pulses like her heart, and now each of you carries a piece of that light." He then completed in thought, "She transformed me. She transformed us." Near the gallery exit, Lydia met an elderly man with grey hair who was holding a notebook. "I'm a journalist. I came to cover the inauguration, and honestly, I didn't expect to leave here so touched." Lydia thanked him with a slight nod, and he continued, "May I write not only about the artist, but about the mother who fought to give her daughter a voice. What you did was not just justice, it was love." She nodded with teary eyes. "Write everything. Because this story belongs to all mothers who couldn't scream, but who will now be heard." As she watched the journalist walk away, she murmured, "May your truth, Emily, echo on every page." Later, when the last guests were already saying goodbye, Lydia walked to the room where Emily's largest painting hung, a work called Blue Silence. She stood there for a while motionless, feeling the weight and lightness of that moment. The gallery was empty, but the space seemed full of whispers, forgotten laughter, ancient footsteps. Harold approached silently, and they stood side by side, just looking. "I think she's at rest now, Lydia." She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and replied, "She didn't rest, Harold. She blossomed." As she touched the frame with her fingertips, she added quietly, "And so did I." Did you enjoy Lydia and Emily's story? Then subscribe to the channel, comment which city you're watching this beautiful story from, leave your like, and check out the next one waiting for you here on screen. I'll see you there.